Well, the unprecedented day in German politics has been closely followed here in Europe and in other parts of the world. Italy's Corriere della Sera wrote it was supposed to be a triumph, but instead it was a day of chaos that left Germany stunned and European allies confused and concerned. The New York Times called it a surprising and demoralizing setback, saying it could be an ominous sign for Mr. Merz's agenda to revitalize growth in Europe's biggest economy. Well, for the view from Washington now, I'm joined by Jackson James, resident senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund. Jack is a transatlantic political insider who has known U.S. presidents and German chancellors. Jack, it's good to see you again. Do you think the events that happened today in the German parliament, have they weakened Merz's hand, particularly when it comes to dealing with U.S. President Donald Trump?
It could, but I think that the problem is that he's going to be looking, he being Trump and he being people here, looking at not only Germany, but looking at Europe as a whole. And I think that to some extent, Mr. Merz is seen as the person who's supposed to galvanize Europe at this point. And I'm thinking that the start of this particular round was not good in the sense of being in control of the coalition. It did then get confirmed in a second. So I think he's going to be confronted with questions when he walks into the Oval Office or whenever he's traveling in the United States, that people will saying, can you hold your own coalition together and can you hold a European coalition together?
Chancellor Merz says that he plans to meet U.S. President Trump. No date has been set for that. What kind of approach do you think Merz should take with Trump?
Well, I think he should probably think about how the common denominators that define the relationship can be emphasized. And that includes looking at the fact that there are common problems that Germany and the United States shares, like border control, like migration issues, like the economy being in good shape, and to some extent, of course, the question about what to do with a war in Europe. So I think he should probably do two things. A, say, we're trying to live up to the kinds of things that you've been telling us to do for some time, and we're hoping and we're going to proceed on that basis that Europe is going to be stronger than it is now. I think that's important that he convey that for burden-sharing purposes. And the second thing is, I think that he's got to basically say it's important that we understand that our security is tied to your security and your security is tied to ours. In that respect, I think it's a little bit more difficult to make that point with Trump. But I think that to some extent, to be able to say that, because Europe is an important and codependent institution for us as a partner and as a leader in Europe.
You know, Jeff, the whole world saw how President Trump berated President Zelensky in the Oval Office this past February. Chancellor Merz, should he be wary of walking into a similar situation?
Absolutely. I think that's the Zelensky trap that he doesn't want to have a problem with. I think that the ideal situation would be to define the common denominators, define the issues that Europe is going to live up to itself, and to stress the fact that that has been along the lines of what Trump has been asking Europe to do. And doing that particular approach, I think it will hopefully be able to avoid the kinds of problems that Mr. Zelensky walked into.
Members of the Trump administration, particularly the vice president, they've been vocal supporters of Germany's far-right AfD party, a party which last week was classified by Germany's domestic intelligence agency as an extremist organization. It has been called a threat to democracy. Could that become a problem for Friedrich Merz?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think that basically what he can respond to that issue by saying that we are trying to deal with polarization in our country. We're trying to deal with some of the issues that you also face in the United States. And we're also trying to do something which I think involves the protection of free speech. That's part of our Constitution as well as yours. And in that respect, I think he can probably avoid making that an issue between him and Trump. Being made by other members of the cabinet, such as Marco Rubio or even the vice president, can be there. But I don't think that Mr. Merz has to comment on that. He just has to say that we're working on a very strong and very capable and very sustainable democracy, just like you are.
Merz is a proponent of reducing dependence on the U.S. security umbrella, and that is what the Trump administration also wants, right? So if he were to focus on that, that would be music to the ears of the U.S. president, or how do you see it?
No question. He can basically say that, we have been slow to get to a point where the things that you've been telling us that we need to do need to be done, and we are now facing them. I'm going to try to implement that in Germany and in Europe as a whole, and therefore I think you're going to help us become a stronger and more sustainable and, quite frankly, valuable partner for the United States of America.
All right. Jackson James with the German Marshall Fund in Washington with the American view of this historic day here in Berlin. As always, Jack, it's good to have you on the program. We appreciate your insights. Thank you.
Good to be here.
Well, world leaders have been congratulating Friedrich Merz on becoming Germany's new chancellor. It was a tense day for the Conservative leader, failing a first round of voting in Parliament, which no post-war chancellor had ever done. A big embarrassment for what normally is a formality. It ended up taking a second try.
So wahr mir Gott helfe.
This was the moment he'd been waiting for, but the day got off to a rocky start. The Member of Parliament Friedrich Merz has not received the required majority of at least 316 votes. In accordance with Article 63, paragraph 2 of the Constitution, he has not been elected Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany. Shockwaves from Berlin felt all the way in Frankfurt, as the stock market reacted to the news and ripple effects were felt beyond Germany. When Merz's party won the election, he promised stability, increased spending, both domestically and on defence. He said the world wouldn't wait for Germany to step up. And in the second vote, 325 votes in favour, a majority, followed by a trip to see Germany's president, making Friedrich Merz, on a day that started with an unexpected defeat, Germany's 10th Chancellor since the Second World War.
So, a testing day and testing times for Mr. Merz. It won't be any different dealing with Germany's biggest trading partner, the US. Jeff Rathke is president of the American Institute for Contemporary German Studies at Johns Hopkins University. Germany's new chancellor is not a Trump fan, I should point out, but what does Trump think of Merz?
Well, Friedrich Merz has been active internationally for a long time. After leaving politics about 20 years ago as a businessman and also as the leader of a non-government transatlantic organization. So Friedrich Merz is pretty well networked here in the United States and well known. I'm not aware that he and Donald Trump have met, at least that's not publicly known. And so whether Donald Trump has a specific opinion of him is a little unclear. But when Merz's party finished first in the February election, Donald Trump trumpeted that as a victory for himself. So he at least associated himself with the victory of Merz's center-right party, and so there's a certain openness to building a relationship, I think.
And so they've both worked in the private sector. Will that help in them getting along?
Perhaps. I think there are certain commonalities that they'll be able to find if they're looking for ways to start a relationship and find a way to strengthen the relationship between the United States and Germany. There's certainly plenty there, and it's really just a question of will from the side of the American president. We've seen many instances where his meetings in the Oval Office have turned a bit tense with his guests. On the other hand, they've at times been quite amicable.
What would you say their common goals are?
Well, I think we've seen over the last few months that Donald Trump is trying to fundamentally reorder and recalibrate America's international relationships. This has a lot to do with trade, also has to do with security and defense. And so I think it's very predictable that those will be at the top of Trump's mind when he talks to Friedrich Merz or when they first meet. From the Chancellor's point of view, I think there are a few different objectives. One is to preserve the relationship with the United States, which is so important for Germany and for Europe. Another is to find ways to protect Germany from some of the measures that the Trump administration has been rolling out, in particular the imposition of tariffs and the threat that those tariffs might increase even more after the 90-day period, the 90-day pause expires. And also to find ways to perhaps explore new areas of cooperation with the United States. And that, I think, is going to be the tricky part, which will be more than just the opening statements in a meeting, will take a lot of painstaking work.
Can I just pick up on that first point you made? During the election campaign, Merz said he wanted Europe to achieve independence from the US. Will that be welcomed in Washington?
Well, on the one hand, the United States, especially during Trump's presidency, but even before, has wanted Europeans to take on more responsibility for their own security. So the massive borrowing facility that Friedrich Merz and the rest of the German Bundestag approved just before they took office, before this parliament took office, will be welcome. And I don't think anyone in the United States is going to have a fundamental problem with Germany and the rest of Europe taking steps to increase their self-sufficiency in security terms. There may be quibbles about one aspect or another, but the broad lines of that will be quite welcome in Washington, I think.
And we'll have to leave it there. Jeff Rathke, thank you very much for joining us here on DW News.
Pleasure.